All right, so welcome back to the study hall, August 20th edition. We're going to be doing some critical reasoning. We're going to be doing something that we may have hinted at it obliquely or so in different sessions before, but it's never been the topic of the session before, which is we're going to talk about reading the words in an order that is not just top to bottom, but that reflects real life reasoning a lot more. Because, one thing that I hope that you get from these sessions is that most of these critical reasoning problems are very much easily tractable real life situations, which are they're real life situations. They're not, incredibly arcane, difficult things to consider. And so really the hard part is just getting past the weirdness of the formal text and the weirdness of the order in which the words are presented. I mean, the weirdest thing about these, we'll talk about this more when there's a problem in front of your face, but the strangest thing about these is the fact that you are presented with all the evidence before you even have any idea what the argument is about. Right? That's just very, very weird. It's not how the world works, really. So we're going to talk about how to cope with that in a sec here. So, but in the meantime, I got to show you I do have to show you the admin screens real quick, so let's do that. The bookkeeping stuff, so to speak. So here's those. When we give you multiple choice questions, you should see underneath your name, you're going to see these polling tools. You're going to see the letters A, B, C, D, E corresponding to answer choices. Please use these for multiple choice questions. Please do not answer multiple choice questions in the chat box. Because there are lots of people here. If we have a lot of people putting letters in a chat box, it will get very chaotic very quickly. So these, I'm going to wait a decent chunk of time for everyone to answer the questions, because that's how the test works. You can't not answer the questions on the test. I mean, after a certain amount of time, we'll move on, because, if you don't answer the problem, I guess that might just mean you're not here. But you should really try to answer all the questions all the time, because that's how the test works. Also, only click your answer once, because if you click it more than once, you'll erase it. If you want to change your answer, click the new answer just once. Incidentally, on critical reasoning in particular, you should be wary of changing answers at all, by the way, because most of the time first guesses tend to be better than subsequent guesses, just because people overthink these. So watch it with that. You might want to be a bit chary about changing your guesses in the first place, but it is what it is. Okay. When we talk about smiley face, that's these faces that are here underneath your name. Everybody give me a smiley face if you see the smiley face. Give me a smiley face if you see the smiley face. Okay, some of you are giving me the smiley face. Yeah, so the point is, again, not to put it in the chat box, just because we don't want 30 people chatting in the chat box at the same time. Chaos would ensue. And the copyright notice that you already saw, all the practice GMAT problems are from the pre-GMAT prep software, which is copyright GMAC. So we just have to tell you that again. Okay, now what you're about to see is a piece of a critical reasoning question. You're not going to see the whole thing. And we're going to talk about why that is in a second. So let me do some covering up of stuff. You'll see it in a second. All right. Here's the question. Okay. What in the world am I doing here? So remember, if you just got here, here is the theme of today's thingy. The theme of today's thingy is this Because the thing is, I mean, let's talk about the human brain here for a second. The problem with the human brain is that when you put ideas into it, it tends to respond to those ideas. And in particular, it tends to have a hard time thinking outside the box of the ideas that have been presented to it. Meaning, for example, if I point to two things and I ask someone, hey, which of those things would you steal? I mean, most people will actually respond with one of them. I mean, very, very surprisingly few people will say something like, I actually wouldn't steal either of them because I don't steal things. I mean, that would be a surprisingly rare answer because it's not the way I ask the question. The way I ask the question is like weirdly powerful in shaping thoughts. So to come back to something like this is a critical reasoning question. See, here's the thing, right? This is a weakening, strengthening, evaluating type of question. So just here are some points about these. One thing totally fundamental about this whole family of questions, the family of some points here. This whole family of strengthen and weaken and evaluate and explain the weirdness situation. They always depend on bringing in outside ideas. Because basically the essence of all four of those problems is, what is this speaker not thinking about? That's basically the deal. I mean, if you've seen any of my presentations on this before, I am very emphatic about this point. You have to bring in outside ideas. It's outside the boundaries of the current passage, outside the scope, if you will. It's not inside the box. Now here's why this is harder than it is in real life. See, here's the thing. This is the way the human brain works. And this is why this is a problem. The problem is that once you've read a passage, your brain, just by virtue of being a normal human brain, your brain has a hard time thinking about things not mentioned in the passage, about things that aren't mentioned in the passage. And this is the fundamental thing. This is the fundamental thing that makes these problems hard. Because if you think about having arguments in real life, like disputes, if you have a counterpoint to what someone is saying, then for the most part, the counterpoint is formulated in your head before this person starts making their case, right? Like if your friend is like, well, let's go eat at this restaurant. If you don't want to go there, you probably already have a reason in your head why you don't want to go there. And then your friend is like, well, let's go because blah, 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 blah. And that might convince you, it might not. But the point is that you don't formulate your objections after the person is talking. I mean, you mostly formulate your objections right up front. And then you take into account what the person said. So this sort of conflict is what makes these critical reasoning problems difficult, because you have to bring in ideas they have not mentioned, but at the same time your brain is going to be very, very tempted to think in terms of the things that they have mentioned. That's the problem. So what's the solution to the problem? Well, there's never going to be a formula for doing all of these things, and there will be some problems. Let me just tell you up front, there will be problems where the suggestion that I'm going to give you today is not going to fly. In particular, there are going to be some problems where you have to do all the reading of the things before you even really understand what the issue is. But here is, in some of these problems, especially the ones that I've picked today, what you can try is this, and what you should try is, okay, I mean, you should always read, the first part you should read is always the question. I mean, no matter what, all the time, you should always read first. Because if you don't read that first, you don't even know what the task is. So, okay, you read the question first. But after reading the question, after reading the question, head straight to the issue. In other words, don't read the full passage yet. Instead, find only the issue under consideration. Then brainstorm. Don't spend a million years doing it, but brainstorm what might affect this issue. Because remember, the point is the way these problems work, this family of problems, the stuff that affects the issue is going to be not mentioned in there. So you'll have an easier time thinking of it if you don't already have the things that are mentioned there banging around your head. So let's try that here. Let's just try that. So here's what I want you guys to do. What I want you to do is this. I want you to just read this question. You're supposed to help evaluate. So you know what that means. Help evaluate is like what would strengthen or weaken if we knew it. So same sort of thing. So this is like what would strengthen or weaken. Okay. Here's the activity. Here's what I want you to try. Read this statement and then just type in the chat box some things that, just brainstorm this statement. Like why might this not work? Like how could you counter this argument? Go ahead and tell me in the chat box. We don't even know what the method is, but it's not the point. What the words say is until it is less expensive, we are not going to use it very much. So in other words, what the issue is, what is COGS? If that stands for something, I am not aware of it. First, let's make sure that you guys understand one key word here. Let me actually just take this to the next uncluttered page. Okay, I mean, you can get a lot from this single sentence without even reading the rest of the passage yet. So here's a single sentence. Because most of you guys are still thinking about cost, but that might mean you're not doing enough thinking about the words that are here right now. Because, okay, what's going on is the question. So the first thing is that, if you think about the way, okay, first thing you want to do is read the sentence, explain it to a 9-year-old. That's always the first thing you do all the time. So, all right, explain to a 9-year-old, there's some way of getting uranium. This method X for getting uranium is expensive. Okay, now one thing that you should totally get from this statement, by the way, is that there are other ways to get uranium. Because if you think about this in a conversation, if I'm saying like, oh, if we can't bring down the cost of getting it this way, then it's not going to be viable. I mean, there has to be some other way to get it. So that's just common sense. But there, you can just figure that out. I mean, a common sense interpretation of this, right? Right now, there are cheaper ways. Because otherwise, this whole discussion would be pointless. Like, if this were the only way to get uranium, it would be the only way to get uranium. Okay. Now, what they're saying is, their argument is, they're saying as long as X is still expensive, the industry won't do it. That's what they're saying. The smiley face if you guys are on board with that. So notice, what's the significance of this? This purple part. Okay, now you guys are starting to give me better things. But if I say until the price goes down, blah, 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 what am I saying about like what are we actually arguing about here? Like let me give you another closer to the ground example. If someone says, unless this dress goes on sale, people won't buy it. Okay. Could I counter it if I said the dress is going to go on sale next month? Is that a counter? It's not. Now, this is probably easier to think about, not because the logic is any different, because the logic is not any different. The logic is precisely, absolutely the same. It's just because there are fewer words, and it's probably easier to think about buying clothes than it is to think about buying nuclear fuel. Okay. So the point of unless the dress goes on sale is that we are only thinking about the situation where the dress is not on sale. So that's it. Like the only situation under consideration here is full price. Not going on sale. This is what the word unless means. I mean, you should know this. This is not something you have to like study or put on flashcards. This is really just something where you have to make the appropriate analogies to real life words. Like if I say something like, if I move to Texas, blah, 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 then the point is that the only situation under consideration is I move to Texas. The only situation we're discussing is I move to Texas. So in other words, if someone says like I am unlikely to go there, this is irrelevant. What if I don't move there? Irrelevant. Have I started planning to move there? Doesn't make any difference. Because that's the power of the word if. And I mean, unless is kind of the same thing, and until. These are all contingencies. These are all, I'm only thinking about one thing. Like if it's unless or until X happens, I'm only thinking about X not happening. So, there you go. Until we raise minimum wage here in Los Angeles, we just passed the law for that. Until the minimum wage goes up. Think about what that means. Think about any discussion starting with that. This means that we are only talking about the situation that obtains until, as in it hasn't happened yet, right? So the only situation that's relevant is right now before the wage goes up. Like anything that happens after the wage goes up, irrelevant. Likelihood of a wage increase, irrelevant. Doesn't make any difference. You guys get the picture. So this means that what should you, because a lot of you guys were mentioning this kind of thing earlier in your brainstorm. It means you didn't think about the words enough. If we're saying as long as X is still an expensive method, what kinds of things are totally irrelevant here, which people might be thinking about? Like what doesn't matter here at all? What's off the table? Yeah, the cost issue is totally off the table. at least the cost of X, is off the table. The cost of other things may not be, but notice that we are only talking about the situation where the cost of X sits right where it is now. So, yes, this is the only situation we're thinking about, is X at its current, which is a high price. This is it. This is the only thing that we are thinking about. So any changes in the price of X, we don't care. Irrelevant. Factors affecting the price of X. Irrelevant. You get the point. So in other words, let me pull some of the things that are not things. Like people mentioned cost of goods, people mentioned stuff like that, people mentioned current methods. So, and the current methods, remember you gotta use your common sense when you read this. Like people are not going to make stupid arguments. So if I say something like, as long as this method stays expensive, we're not going to use it, this means that you don't really need to think about this. A couple people wrote something equivalent to this. Because again, these things have to be reasonable conversations. They have to not be conversations that are completely misguided or silly or trivial or whatever. Like for instance, from this statement, if it's unlikely to be viable solely because it is expensive, then you know that there are ways that are less expensive because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. That's basically the idea. And so therefore what that means is that this situation does not obtain. I mean, it cannot be true because it would mean this whole conversation was just, needless nonsense. However, if you are thinking about the cost of other methods, you might want to think about whether they go up. Let's see if anybody read that. When will... So yeah, see also another thing like this. The board is getting cluttered. Someone wrote this. This is pretty much exactly what is ruled out by this as long as X is still expensive part. Meaning this is hypothesizing that X will get less expensive. That's exactly what we don't want to talk about here. It's kind of like if I move to Texas, this is like saying, what if you don't move to Texas? Or until the minimum wage increases, this is like talking about if the minimum wage does increase. These are precisely the situations that we do not want to discuss here. So, no, don't do it. All right, now let's take this to another page. Let's clean up the board and let's look at this again. Where was that? There it is. Okay, so now there are some things, right? Still the cost of extracting uranium can be reduced. This method is unlikely to be commercially valuable. Now let me pluck something. Let me pluck something out of this. So let me pluck a few of you guys' answers out of here. There's okay. Let me pull two of them out here. These ones are this one's good. This one's a very nice brainstorm because notice that this is totally a reason, this top one. I mean, this is a reason, this would be a very good reason why we might have to start using X, even though it costs a lot. And notice that it is a completely new idea, which is also attractive because the way they write these problems is the correct answers are completely new ideas. This is the kind of thing that you want to brainstorm. This is what you want to do. This one may be depending on if you, where you wrote be, if you actually meant to write become, then this would also be a good brainstorm. I mean, you know right now that it's not the only option, because if it were the only option right now, then this whole discussion would be pointless. So, and the discussion is not pointless. So, but yeah, right, this is, even though we're pegging the price of this method X, this is like one of the other things, right? This is kind of, these are very related brainstorms. In other words, what you should come up with when you think about this issue, I mean, you should basically be thinking, okay, well, I'm not thinking about any changes in X. So I need to think about what might happen to the other methods. Aha. To make X start looking more attractive even though X has not changed. There you go. This is basically what you need to be thinking in some way, shape, or form or another. And notice that you can totally come up with this without even reading the passage. You can do it. You can totally do it. So, and my point is, if they don't mention this in the passage, then it is much easier to think about this now than it is to think about this after you have read the passage. And that's why the exercise of today is suggested, right? This is much easier to think about. It's easier to think of this if you have not yet read the passage, because the passage tends to shape your thoughts, and that's not such a great thing here. So now here is the problem with answer choices. Remember, here's what you came up with. So go ahead and pick a multiple choice option. Here's where the multiple choice answers are located. Please use the choices that are underneath your name. Please don't answer in the chat box. Multiple choice answers, guys, they're here. They don't answer in the chat box. When I write, please don't answer it. Guys, don't answer in the chat box. Follow the directions. This is not a joke, Ben. This is not a joke. Shagufta, this is not a joke. Okay. All right, let's pick a thing. If you haven't picked anything yet, then pick something soon. Okay, so basically, remember what you need. You need something that's going to compromise the other methods, because we are only considering the situation in which the seawater thing remains prohibitively expensive. So I mean, we did have 2 people pick choice C here. If you pick choice C, I hope that you just arrived at, like you just logged in, because we just spent about 10 minutes talking about why C is specifically ruled out here. I mean, remember, if you did just get here, this word restricts the discussion. We are only talking about the situation that obtains while the price is still high. So anything that has to do with the price actually decreasing is irrelevant, because that's the word until. That's what the word until means. Same thing, until the minimum wage goes up, blah, 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 blah. That means we're only talking about when it's still low. So that's what that means. We're only thinking about the situation that obtains while this method is still expensive. So this is specifically there to rule out things like C. Don't do it. Don't pick it. Specifically made irrelevant. Okay, but if you have this in mind, if you have this, it needs to be something that is going to compromise the other methods of getting uranium that are not method X. So if you think about that, this is a prediction. Look for it. Basically, don't bend your thoughts to meet the answer choices. Just see whether the answer choices meet your thoughts. So this is the non-C water. This is the other methods. So if that is running out, then that's totally a thing. That's going to make the seawater method look good. Even if it's expensive, it's going to be the only way to do it after a while. Because if you use up stuff on land, then guess what you got to do, right? So this is the answer that we want. It's the correct answer to the problem. The only other answer that people picked here is D. I mean, notice D doesn't matter because D doesn't compromise the other methods. Because the cost is what it is, right? Like, I mean, if you pick D, then your thought process in your head might be something like, well, maybe if there's a ton of stuff into C, then that will bring down the cost. Remember, you can't think about that because the cost is high. And we're only thinking about the situation when the cost is high. So, like, whatever consequences you think this has, it doesn't have here. So, I mean, the amount of stuff that there is, this would only matter if it affected cost, which clearly it doesn't. The choice B, well, I mean, choice B is not a thing here. I mean, this doesn't affect anything. I mean, the best answer to why not B is because B totally doesn't matter. I mean, to give any sort of more detailed answer to that, I'd have to know why someone thought it did matter, because it doesn't matter. So, but if you do brainstorm this issue first, you will never come up with something like B. Like, you would never think about, oh, what is the distance between like where they get this stuff and where they use it. So, but D could ultimately lead to A, but it could not. I mean, you're just kind of making that up at random. Like, if you ever have a can, could, might, maybe in your reasoning, stop, do not even reason any further than that. It's not a thing. You can't just make up stuff and then build an argument on it. Crystal, if you run out of something on land, then you would have to get it out of the ocean, because the Earth is land and ocean. So if it runs out, then if this is expensive, it will just be, well, we're screwed, now we have to do it. So, I mean, you do have to approach this with an implicit understanding that we do need uranium. We can't just like stop using it. So, I mean, that's just, you gotta get that, because again, there would be no point in discussing this. Like, if uranium were some unnecessary luxury item, then we wouldn't be having the conversation in the first place. So, yeah. And again, you can't make up a substitute product because words don't say that. Remember that as soon as you get into might be, could be, maybe, don't do it. Because that could always just be countered with might not, could not, maybe not. So you can't go anywhere with maybes or might or could. Okay. Let's talk. Any other questions about these things? All right, let's look at another one. Let me black out the appropriate parts of this one. Here. Okay. There you go. Think about, again, just brainstorm what might affect this issue, and then in the chat, let me have some ideas. What might affect this plan? Okay, about this is the first thing that anyone wrote. Let me sort of pick on this for a second. This is not how the GMAT ever works. Like the GMAT will never, in real life, sometimes people do this. Sometimes people will counter an argument that says X by saying, actually, X is false. That's not how this test ever works. Like if you've done more than a few GMAT problems, you should know this, but the GMAT will not weaken things by saying that they are false. The GMAT will weaken things by bringing in new outside ideas that weigh against. Like it's like if you're looking at if you're on a jury, it's like bringing in additional evidence against the defense or whatever. So the point is, the GMAT will not do this. In other words, if it says nourishing, and the weakener is not going to be, oh, actually we're kidding, they're not nourishing. Like the test will never, ever, ever, ever counter X by saying not X. Okay, but the other thing is also, I mean, apples are apples. In fact, this problem is a great place to talk about apples to apples comparisons. Ha ha ha. I mean, if this is not, the nourishing part's not even an issue here because it's literally apples to apples. I mean, if they were trying to sell apples to a population that is currently eating other things, then that might be an issue. But because we are literally comparing apples to apples, this is basically a non-issue because apples are apples. So it shouldn't be anything about the apples themselves. All right. Let's take this to another page. I like that a lot of you guys are typing things, by the way, because sometimes people tend to be sort of gun shy with typing stuff. So this is obviously an exercise where participation matters because there are no choices on the board yet. So I'm glad to see that people are doing that. If you see an empty board, you'll see a not empty board for a while. Okay, so a lot of people are talking about this sort of thing. Basically, are there any non-cost reasons? That could be a thing. So, by the way, let me pick on that tax thing real quick, but you might need to think about yes, you might need to think about non-cost reasons. Okay. This is not a thing though. Like when they're not going to trick you. I mean, if they're selling at that price, then that's really the price that they're selling at. So you don't need to think about things that make the words false. So I mean, you can assume that all of this is rolled into the price because remember they're not going to trick you with the words. So like if they were like, haha, actually it's not half the price because taxes, then they would discuss. Okay, so let's put some other ideas on the board. Yeah, so the last thing about if they perceive lower quality, that would also fall into the same sort of, like a lot of you guys have mentioned different aspects of what is ultimately the same thing, right? So is there any negative stigma, if there's a stigma of lower cost with cheap products, sure. Also, is there a stigma associated with non-domestic products, right? If people if people are xenophobic about what they eat, right? Imports, maybe they don't want. Like all of these would be reasons why they won't buy. Okay. Now, see, here's the thing. Let's talk about a couple of things that are not things. So you don't need to think about this stuff. I mean, anything going on in Kosolia is totally irrelevant. We don't care at all. I mean, like this right here, this might be why they're thinking about doing it. Like they might be thinking about selling to other countries because the domestic market is flagging. But that's not, it doesn't make any difference because the conversation is, will we be able to sell our product in other countries? Not why we want to do it. So this has nothing to do with that conversation. Again, imagine an actual conversation, you would know this is irrelevant right away. Like this has nothing to do with the current discussion. Imagine actually sitting around a table and discussing this with people. The current discussion is, will our apples sell in this other country? Doesn't make any difference if they're selling in our country. There's no point. Same thing, easy, like the blue squares that I made up there, like things like transport costs are going to be rolled into. This is not kidding, right? You don't need to think about taxes, and you don't need to think about transport costs because those are all rolled into the price already. Like if they can do this, if they can market apples over there at half the current price, then they can do it. But that means that they can do it despite. Oh, but it's the same question that was on the previous page. So, yeah. So let's see. However, what you do need to think about is what Ben wrote. Is this? Aha! This could be a thing. I mean, we know that they can get apples over there and sell them at half the current price. However, if a price war starts, then that might, this is also relevant. Okay, and basically these are going to be the only two kinds of things that could affect this. Like you are either going to have non-cost reasons or you're going to have cost reasons. And the cost reason can't be the cost of the import apples because we know they can do that. So notice this is a complete universe of possibilities. Like when you brainstorm this, you can actually be confident that there are no other possible ways to do this, right? There are only two ways in the world that could affect this plan, which are number one, cost. And since we know the cost of the imported apples is going to be low, the only cost factor that matters is if the domestic market in this country of Earthland can price match, if they can lower the price accordingly. And then everything else is kind of lumped together into non-cost issues, which means that for some reason, for any reason at all, people in Earthland don't want to buy the imports even though they are cheaper. I mean, these are the only two things that could affect this plan. Because if people are willing to buy imported apples and the domestic market cannot price match them, then the apples will definitely sell. That's not even sort of an issue. So a lot of the time when you do this brainstorming, you can come up with a complete universe of possibilities. This very often happens. So these are literally the only two ways to do this. I mean, nothing else is going to affect the argument as stated, because everything else has been ruled out as a factor. Like, we're not talking about adjustments to the import price because we said that they can do it. So let's. Okay, Dr. Z, that's kind of a neat thing to think about. We'll get there. Okay, so here is the question with answer choices and with the actual passage. And here is our universe of possibilities. Okay. Okay, so you guys pretty much have things. So yeah, I mean, if the domestic market can price match, that's choice E. They can do it. They can price match. They could easily afford to reduce the price. So there it is. The other things are not things. This would be a viable way to do it too, but they just don't go there. They don't go into non-cost like stigma issues that would outweigh a price difference. So none of you guys picked anything else except D, dog. I mean, The problem with D is that it doesn't cast doubt on the plan. I mean, the problem with D is that it makes the plan look like even better. Because D basically says that in Ertland they can only grow their own apples during some small window of time. And so therefore that makes it look even better to export apples to them during the rest of the year. Because they can't grow their own. So it's the wrong way. Wrong way answer. Don't go the wrong way. You should go the right way. Okay. So you don't need to spend 1,000,000 years brainstorming. Because, I mean, again, think about real discussions, right? Like if you're arguing something like that people won't buy this dress even though, as long as it's expensive and doesn't go on sale, people won't buy it. I mean, any reason you formulate why people might still buy the dress at full price, you're probably going to formulate in the first few seconds of thinking about it. So the question, there shouldn't really be a time issue here, or at least it shouldn't be a significant issue, because most of these brainstorms should be pretty much instantaneous. Like if your mind comes up with reasons, external reasons why something might be false, your mind should come up with them instantly. It shouldn't be after like a long period of consideration, because that's not really how it works. Okay, now let's talk about this sort of, I hope I answered your question, Crystal. Let's talk about this, because I mean it's all right, if it does take, and I mean if it takes a long time to think of cost issues, then you can get take-home points about that. Like you can, for example, this is a mathematical argument about cost X outweighing cost Y. And so if we know that we can lower cost X to a certain level, then mathematically the only possible issue there is if cost Y can go down as well. So that's, you could get a take-home point like that. I mean, just think about what are the factors in some math comparison, and then just think about which ones are fixed and which ones are not fixed. And then you can just remind yourself to think about it. What's the other factor doing? Just get take-home points accordingly, basically, is the idea. All right, I mean, let's talk about, yeah, I mean, right, if you brainstorm stuff, then reading the option should take way less time. Because, like, if you know this, if you know that this is the only way you can do it, then, like, no, this goes the wrong way. And, oh, hey, there it is, right? It should take way less time to read through the choices if you have. I mean, if you know that these are the only two ways to do this, then, honestly, as soon as you get to the first, like, 4 words, you can already cross this off. I mean, most of the varieties, we don't even care, man. This is already not those two things. So the point is that the process of reading the choices should be, even if it does take a little bit of time to brainstorm this, you're going to gain that time back by how much faster it's going to be to get through the choices. All right, interesting discussion here. So let's talk about this here. Because there is one kind of generalization that you can make, but let me give you some here. Let me give you what is meant to be here. Here's an argument. This argument's not supposed to be very hard to think about. What are some ways that you can weaken that argument? In the chat box, give me a couple ways. Okay, different food, exercising more, sure. Different food that for whatever reason is less conducive to weight gain, okay. No, portion control, no, because he is eating more food than ever before. So we know that portion control is not happening. I mean, you can't raise issues that are specifically contradicted in the words. I mean, pooping more is not a realistic concern because, you know, what goes in has to come out. So whatever you eat, you're going to poop out. Oh, okay. Could have developed yeah, right. Developed a disease that affect weight gain or hinders it. Okay. Or even started a medicine that accelerates metabolism. Also, make sure that you know what couple things about these. So this is not a thing because, I mean, I don't know exactly what you mean by this, but this could mean one of two things. This could mean that he has already been eating the increased amount of food, but that's false because he just started increasing his food intake. So therefore, this is a false statement. Alternatively, it could mean that the extra food just doesn't affect him at all. But that's not realistic. I mean, if you add food, it's going to do something. So, like, same thing with this. This is also not terribly realistic. So, you don't need to consider unrealistic things. I mean, like this, if you're thinking along these lines, then, I mean, a metabolism could suddenly change by introducing a drug or a disease. So those are realistic ways why the same thing might happen, but you don't need to come up with things that are, like same thing, eating more food won't increase weight. That's just not realistic. I mean, if everything else is the same and you add more food, you're going to weigh more, unless something else changes. So surgery could be, well, probably not. If you know how those surgeries work, then they work by preventing you from eating more food. If you're talking about like gastric band or, laparoscopic surgeries or something like that, those generally work by preventing this because they make your stomach literally smaller. So actually, if this is happening, then the surgery would be irrelevant. So. Okay, but now, all right, so notice how you did that. Just, we're going to generalize this in a sec. How would you strengthen this argument? Yeah, right. So basically not working out anymore. Or even working out less. Sure. Same food, or even fattier food. Basically no changes to metabolism from disease or drugs or whatever, or even slower. There you go. Hold on just a second. So now so basically what I mean, when you say indigestion, if you mean he's throwing up food, that would actually also be a factor. If it's just like heartburn or something, then poor him. But yeah, if you mean he's throwing up the food, would actually be another factor. Here's what I want you to notice about this, though. So basically, here's the deal. There are two possible outcomes to this, which are what is weird and what is not weird, right? Like the two possible outcomes under consideration are the following, the two things that can happen here are he gains weight and he doesn't. Okay, now the point is that one of these is what common sense would expect from the evidence, and the other one is not. Like, I mean, if you were just told that someone is eating all this extra food now, they keep the weight gain is what you would expect. So this is like normal or expected from the existing evidence. I mean, smiley face if you guys at least understand that point. Whereas this is the surprising outcome, or it's weird, or unexpected given what we have been told. So notice how you guys are doing this. I mean, there is a useful, I mean, this is all common sense in the real world, but sometimes in classrooms people need the boost. I mean, the argument here is saying that something expected will happen, right? That's what this argument has. This argument says, blah, 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 therefore something we would normally expect will happen. All right, that's what's going on here. I mean, in this case, the weight gain is something we would normally expect. So to weaken this, notice you are coming up with reasons why the weird thing would happen. Yeah. Now, here's the thing that you should realize here, right? Like, you can strengthen these. You're still thinking about, like, even if you come up with working out less or fatty food or, like, this kind of thing, that the point is the only reason you're even thinking about these things is because they are things why. Even if you want to strengthen this, there are reasons that would weaken it. So, in other words, if you want to strengthen the normal or expected thing, you are still doing the same job. You're still finding a reason why the weird or unexpected thing will happen. Then just say that it won't, or that the opposite will happen, or even the opposite. So that's the point, right? The point is that you are thinking about the weird thing all the time. This is also true if the argument is the reverse. Like if the argument says something like this, now the argument is saying something we would not normally expect. So that's why it has the word nevertheless in there too. So in this case, the argument is blah, 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 therefore, but even though, but still, weird thing will happen. See, now if you want to strengthen that, then you would do that by finding the same things that would weaken the thing that's up there, right? Like if you wanted to strengthen, my copy and paste is being stupid. If you wanted to strengthen this, you would just take the same things that weaken the argument upstairs, and you would raise them. You'd raise them as issues. Yeah, or if you wanted to weaken this argument, then you would just raise the same issues that used to strengthen it. So the point here, and I mean, I think this is kind of where that original question is headed. The point here is that you should basically always be brainstorming reasons why the outcome will not be as expected. I mean, and it actually, what might be ironic about this is that it doesn't even matter whether your job is to strengthen or weaken. I mean, you need to think about that at the end to make sure that you're not going the wrong way. But regardless of which job is your job, notice that in all four of these cases, you are doing exactly the same job, which is this job that I'm going to highlight in yellow. Like you are always finding reasons why the weird or other unexpected side will occur. Which, common sense, if you think about it, that makes sense, because you don't really need to collect more evidence for something that you already expect to happen. Like you only need to think about what might go wrong. Like if you look at a math program and it says this trip will take 6 hours, you don't need to find additional reasons why it will take 6 hours. That's not how life works. I mean, you just need to think about why might it take longer than that. And then if none of those things happen, then it will take 6 hours. So that's the point. So whenever you read these arguments, you should be brainstorming why they will not, or why the weird thing will happen. So in the case of Apple prices, I mean, in this case, the weird outcome would be if the apples don't sell. The normal outcome is that they will because they're cheaper. So this boils down to why might they not sell, and you don't really need to think about why might they sell. So, I mean, whatever the question asks you to do, it's the same path. I mean, anything at all about this. If they say what strengthens the plan, then you would basically just be saying that these things don't happen or can't, or that there are no non-cause issues. You're still thinking about the same thing, though. Same thing, I think it will take 6 hours. I think it won't take 6 hours. Either way, we're thinking about things that would delay us. I mean, one person's going to say those will happen, one person's going to say they won't, but the point is they're still brainstorming the same thing. So, I mean, you might, in real life, sometimes you have a situation where both outcomes are equally plausible and there's not a weird side. But in general, the GMAT doesn't roll like that, because the GMAT generally gives you a bunch of evidence that would make you think this will turn out one way, and then, but, oh, well, maybe not. Right? The evidence will not be like equally split, because there's not enough room to do that. They don't have enough room to give you a bunch of evidence that would make you think two opposing things equally not. So, all right, let's try another one. This time I'm just going to show you the whole problem, but not the choices yet. Okay. There you go. So what I want you to do is brainstorm. You don't need to chat it this time, but just get an idea in your head of what might be the reason, or what are the possible types of reasons. Because, I mean, this is a math argument, so especially in math arguments, there are usually very few possible types of answers. Like if the conclusion of the argument is ultimately mathematical, like this will be less or more or blah, 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 you can usually come up with a list of absolutely everything that could possibly affect the argument. And this is indeed a mathematical argument. Not really an argument, but it's the issue. The issue is mathematical. Okay, so think about why Okay, here are your choices. You don't need to chat these guys. Alright. This time, yeah, you have the choices. So pick a multiple choice response in the multiple choice response area. Okay. Should pick a thing pretty soon. Been brainstorming this for a while, so. All right, let's discuss. Remember that when there's a statistical argument, this is also a thing about the test. This is not just, the test is written this way for a reason, which is to get you to think about the stuff the quant section doesn't make you think about. But just make sure that you know this. When there's a statistic, in fact, there are several study hall sessions about this exact idea of statistics in CR problems. You might want to check those out in the study hall archive. The point is the statistic matters. And so the issue in the correct answer will, not just might, will be something that affects this particular statistic, but would not affect other statistics. So for example, if you're thinking about, like, you have to notice that this is about percentages. So basically what I'm telling you in fewer words is that you need to think about percentages. If you're not thinking about percentages, you're not going to get this problem right, period, end of story. So all you people talking about the weight of the bottles, I'm looking at you because nope, not a thing. Like if you are not thinking explicitly about what would affect this percentage, then that's just a whole big bucket of nope. So, yeah. So what affects percentages and what doesn't, by the way? I mean, does the weight of the bottles matter at all? here. Does it matter if glass bottles are heavy? Doesn't make a darn bit of difference because percentage. I mean, the whole point of percentages, by the way, is to make that not matter. That's the whole point. That's why percentages are things. That's why we even invented them. So weight of glass versus weight of a bottle versus weight of a can, we don't care. It's irrelevant. Because percentages are relative to these things. I mean, that's the point. The use of percentages makes these things irrelevant. It's not as a percentage of the total weight. It's the percentage decrease in the glass was more than the percentage decrease in the aluminum. So it's not relative to the total. If it was percentage of total, notice that if we were talking about each of these things as a percentage of total weight, then this could matter. But that's not what we're talking about. We're saying that the percent decrease in glass weight was greater than the percent decrease in plastic weight. These are separate things. So, yeah. That's why it doesn't make any difference. Decreasing percentage of, I mean, I wouldn't call it a distraction because it's not really a distraction. It's kind of the whole point of the problem is to get you to think about what percentages measure and what they don't. So, like if I say, let's say you have a town, right? Let's say that the town has, let's say the town currently has 1 million Christians, and let's say the town currently has 1,000 Muslims. Okay, then like the deal is think about percentages being greater, right? Like if you, let's say that goes to 1,300, and let's say that this goes to the 1.1 million. I mean, this would be a 10% increase. This would be a 30% increase. I mean, clearly the size doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference. There are so many more Christians. So, if you were talking about because you are not talking about the contribution of each of these to the overall population of the city. I mean, if you were, then this would obviously be a much bigger chunk of that, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this. So that's kind of like that. I mean, you shouldn't have to plug numbers to see that, but if you do have to plug numbers once in order to develop the intuition, then do it. But this is the goal. The goal that you should have when you study these things is to develop an intuition that does not require plugging numbers. I mean, if you do need to plug numbers once or twice to get there, then do it. But the point is that you shouldn't have to waste the time as you're doing the problem. So, that. Also, the other thing that doesn't make any difference, aside from glass bottles themselves being heavy, is it doesn't matter what the relative amounts of them. Just like we don't care if there are 1 million Christians here if we're comparing these two blue percentages. So the overall preponderance of, is preponderance just meaning which one is there more of glass versus aluminium if you're not from the United States. That's also irrelevant for the same reason that we don't care about 1 million versus 1,000. That doesn't make any difference. So make sure you know that. So not A. A doesn't make any difference because percentages, notice, no distraction. I mean, calling A a distraction is to call A a distraction is to misunderstand the purpose of giving you these problems. I mean, the whole point of this problem is to realize that this is not a thing. This doesn't matter. Percentage. This we don't care what was in the containers because we only care about the containers, the empty containers in the trash. This is a reason why percentage-wise, this would totally explain it. Again, you gotta interpret words like many and few in the ways that make sense with common sense. They're not going to deceive you with these words. So I think I also talked about this in a few of these other study hall sessions. But the meaning of these words is not always the same. It's going to depend on what the passage is about. But when you see these kinds of words that are qualitative but that represent some sort of math thingy, then the point is they're not going to trick you. So the point is that you should read these words in a way that agrees with common sense and that makes them significant. I mean, it is relevant to the problem. So like, for example, if you say something, like let's say that you're trying to decide whether to buy thing A or thing B, and it's a cost decision. Like let's say that you, thing A is significantly more expensive than thing B. However, thing B requires regular maintenance at some expense. Okay, like the point of these words, this word, the point is specifically for you to not plug in for them. The point is for you to just understand why someone would choose words like that. The point here would be, if this was any sort of normal conversation, then the point of using that choice of words would be that this outweighs, the red thing outweighs the blue thing. Just because it does. I mean, if that were not true, then this would be tricky, and the GMAT is never, ever, ever, ever tricky. I mean, the GMAT uses words in the way that normal people use words in conversation. So just keep that in mind. Like if I flip this around and made it say, let's say that thing A is somewhat, didn't mean to do that. Copy. Paste. Thing A is somewhat more expensive than thing B. However, thing B requires regular maintenance at considerable expense. Now we're talking, right? I need to change. Now I need to change the colors of the red and the blue. So this is now blue and this is now red. Because considerable is more than somewhat. All right, just keep that in mind. So when you look at words like many and few, they're not going to be a jerk to you. So those are going to mean enough to make a difference in those. Because these are separately issues for the glass and for the plastic. Yeah, well, the new idea, that's the point of these problems. The point of these problems is they don't just say not X when they say X. D and E, you guys didn't really pick. The total weight purchased increased at a faster rate. I mean, D would be relevant, but D is the wrong way. I mean, this makes the weird findings seem even weirder. I mean, this makes the findings now the findings make even less sense. Because remember, the findings are that the decline in glass was bigger. So if people were starting to buy more and more and more glass, that doesn't explain this. That actually makes us even less. That makes us even less inclined to think this makes sense. And then nobody picked E because E is pretty, I guess it's pretty clear that E is irrelevant. But the point is, I mean, they always weaken things by picking new ideas. But in this problem, you don't even need to really go there because you just have to understand what percentages are. I mean, you don't need the new idea thing to rule out A. I mean, ruling out A is actually just the most fundamental understanding of what a percentage is and what it is not. So, I mean, in other problems, you can do that. Like if it's, if I say cost of something won't go down, you're not looking for the cost will go down. But here, that's not even the issue. The issue is whether percentages measure and when they do it, where they not measure. Okay. That's it. We're over time here, so let's kill it. I got some more of these on the board. So the next study hall is not in 2 weeks; it's in 3 weeks. Something I want to say it's the 10th of September. So 3 weeks, not 2. The time I don't think has been set yet. I'm not going to be in the U.S. I don't know when I'm going to be awake and asleep. So we'll just look on the Thursdays with Ron webpage for the time. It'll be announced on there eventually at some point. Okay, let's kill the recording. Good night, guys.